record on this computer. Cool. So, hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Michael Manatskanian, and I'm going to be going over Creative Finance 101 with you today. And high level, we're going to talk about finding, structuring, and negotiating low money down deals utilizing creative finance. So, before you all ask, this is how you pronounce it. Manatskanian. Manatskanian. And I'm a buy and hold real estate investor, and we could talk about my journey to real estate investing on the next slide. So who am I? I'm I like to say I'm a self-made real estate investor. I really truly started with nothing and have worked my way towards a 42 rental portfolio worth over $10 million in several different states. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida, California, Washington, as well as Alaska, which is where I got my start. And then, my journey real quickly is in 2018, I started learning about real estate investing. I recently joined the military. I had time on my hands and I wanted to see, I was very passionate about the idea of being financially independent, but I really didn't want to wait 20 plus years. I knew real estate was going to be the way to help me accelerate that journey. So I started learning 2018. 2020, I was stationed in Fairbanks, Alaska at that point for over a year. And I bought my first property, which was a duplex that I house hacked. I lived in one unit, rented out the other, and then renovated both the units before selling it 2 years later. And then currently I'm doing, I've house hacked several times. I buy plenty of properties creatively. Also traditionally, I wholesale properties. And so, I was able to achieve financial independence at 27 with my first 26 rentals. So that's what it took to get my financial independence number. This was all while being active duty in the Army still. Although I'm financially independent, my wife is retired. She works within our business. I actually still work a W-2 job, which I really enjoy. My journey, once again, at a high level, house hacker. I did a lot of wholesaling when, you had to wait a year between each. So I started wholesaling out of state. I did my first creative finance deal, was a seller finance off-market deal. And that in conjunction with my house hacking was able to, that's what I utilized to achieve financial independence. And then I continued doubling down in creative financing as the market pivoted and interest rates continued to go up. And I was able to buy almost $7 million more of real estate in 2023 alone. And I utilize other people's money for all of those acquisitions. So now I primarily focus on creative finance as well as raising capital. I'm a chemical engineer by trade. That's my background. And then I'm also an Army veteran. So we call what I do in the creative space transaction engineering. I'm a leader in the community sub 2 with Pace Morby. And what I primarily specialize in is underwriting deals, really looking at investment opportunities and seeing first, is it a good deal or is it not? And if it's not, can we make it a good deal? Or is it worth, or do we just move on from it? And then my goal this year is to help over 100 intentional investors achieve financial independence. And for me, intentional investors are those that understand their current financial situation, know where they want to end up, what are their financial goals, and then they define a very specific path to achieve that. So let's talk about what we're going to go over today. So we're going to go over how to structure creative deals, examples of creative deals that I've closed so you can see real life examples, how to find these creative deals, and then how to negotiate creative deals. You know what? I'll probably get rid of the bunny because I don't want to explain all that shit. Like I had a clown for balloons, and I'm like, I don't even want to explain that to people either. So let's talk about some of the common creative financing methods. So we have seller and owner financing, which we'll dive deeper into the next slide. Subject to, which we'll dive deeper as well in the next slide, as well as hybrid. At a high level, here's a few other creative financing strategies. Morby method is basically doing a seller finance transaction. However, first you take a new loan out on the property, and then you cover the down payment costs and closing costs. And then after closing, the seller finances you back a portion, if not all of your closing costs, your down payment. And that helps you minimize your out-of-pocket expense to purchase the property, but it has to cash flow enough to pay back all those debts each month. And that's what I did on these 20 rental cabins that you see in the bottom right. I was able to acquire them, generate over $5,000 a month in pure cash flow. And I actually got paid a few grand to acquire those properties. A lease option, which is essentially putting a property under contract in a sense, you're paying a option fee, and the option is the option to purchase the property at set terms. And in the meanwhile, you are leasing out the property from them with the option to buy at some point in the future. And we do that for a variety of reasons in the creative finance community. That's actually how I was able to buy the property in the top right here with the pool. The reason why we did it in that instance was the seller wanted to buy their next property right away, and the lease option was going to allow them to remove the impact of the mortgage from their debt to income ratio much sooner. And it allowed me the security to know that as soon as they close on their next property, we can execute our option to buy their property immediately after. We have a novation agreement, which is essentially finding a property that maybe is in distress or needs some type of value add, whether it's renovations, rehab, something like that, or updated photos, listing on the MLS, that you're going to increase the value of it and then sell it. And then you're going to split the profits with the seller, whether it's a fixed amount that you're going to get or a portion of the profits based on a set purchase price. We have an agreement for sale or a contract for deed, which is similar to subject to. However, it's you don't actually take title at closing. Title will be transferred to you once the debt is paid off. And so once again, we're going to really focus in on the main three: seller and owner financing, or seller or owner financing, subject to, and hybrid, which is a combination of the two. Do you guys feel like that's pretty freaking clunky? Because I'm not talking about the first three.
I was just kind of thinking that actually, if you're gonna focus on,
I should probably just talk
I think
about these
you
three
explained it, but yeah,
and
maybe
then
just
go to the next and then add that slide after, probably, huh? Like
I,
something like this,
yeah.
where it's like go to seller owner financing, subject to financing, hybrid, and then go deeper into these, maybe.
Since this is for, you said the target audience is people that aren't in like real estate necessarily, right?
They're in real estate, but not in like creative finance.
Not in creative finance.
Maybe they've
Okay.
heard of it, maybe they've heard of seller financing, but that's not even something on their radar. They have no skills to be able to execute on something like that.
Okay. Yeah, something to think about. Maybe you don't need the overview of all the options if you're going to focus on talking about just three.
Oh, right. Maybe still keep it here, you're saying, but just don't actually dive into them. Just show these and say, we're going to dive into these three.
If it was me, I'm contemplating just making this an appendix slide.
Not even showing something and just going straight to seller
Just
subject.
keep it more high level, you know? Like you said, don't give away all the gems for the
Yeah, I'm cool
presentation.
with that. Because it seems like, okay, well, I'm talking Mori method, and they don't even know what the fuck seller financing is theoretically at this point, or some might not know.
It's
Definitely
just,
putting the cart before the horse. So maybe I'll just hop into these three. Or you think do this, but only show these three.
you could do it. And then, yeah, that's like your overview slide of what you're going to cover today. And then
Mhm.
if you want to, you can say there's many other options out there, but these are the three that I'm focusing on talking about, rather than like hit them with everything at the
Right.
front, you know?
All right. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get rid of the animation here then. And get rid of the animations. We're gonna get rid of all, we'll leave this slide as a full slide. And it'll just be this, just like this, actually. So it'll be no animation. It'll just be here are common creative financing methods. We're going to talk about the top three over the next few slides. Maybe I'll leave it like
Oh,
that.
something like that. Perfect.
Yeah, there you go. That's pretty succinct. Cool. So what is owner financing? So owner financing is a type of real estate agreement that allows you as the buyer to pay the seller in installments as opposed to using a traditional mortgage from a bank. So in this situation, you're basically recreating a mortgage, but through a seller itself, through their equity in the property, as opposed to going through a bank. So why, like, when is that a possibility? That's possible when the seller owns a property outright, or they have very little mortgage or debt in place that you're going to pay off at closing. So then they own the property outright, and then they can set the terms. You guys can agree on the terms together at which you're going to acquire the property. This is common more so in what we call tired landlords, absentee landlords, or maybe I'll just get rid of this shit. I don't know why I have expired. I mean, that is true. That's where my historical examples have been, but okay. So A tired or absentee landlord is someone who no longer lives in the property. They have owned it for a while and have a lot of equity in the property. And there might be more motivations, but those are the main two. They no longer live there. Ideally, they even live out of state if possible. And they own it basically outright or have a ton of equity in it so that you can structure the terms of the deal through them directly. So the awesome part of structuring your financing directly with the seller is you guys have full control of everything. You know, when you're buying a property conventionally, you can basically say, hey, this is my purchase price, and the seller decides they want it or not. There's a little wiggle room if you're going to waive contingencies, maybe who's going to cover how much at closing costs, commissions, but really it's purchase price is the only negotiation tool you have. Well, the cool thing about seller financing is you can negotiate the purchase price, the down payment amount, whether it's a dollar amount or a percentage of the purchase price, the monthly payments, which I like to focus on. A lot of people ask me, how do I get so many 0% interest rate loans? Well, I don't really focus on interest rate when I'm talking to sellers. I do highlight that here, but I focus more on the monthly payments themselves rather than, hey, what interest rate are you looking for? Because if you ask someone that, they're going to just say an interest rate that they think makes sense, as opposed to focusing on what payment amount are you looking for, and then reverse engineering the interest rate and the term of the loan to be close to 0%. And then if there's a balloon. So if you're familiar with an amortization schedule, let's say you take out a new loan from the bank and it's amortized over 30 years. That means if you make payments, the exact amount of payment you should each month for those 30 years, it'll be paid off in full. Well, a balloon, let's say at 10 years, means at the 10-year mark, regardless of how much debt is left on the balloon, you have to somehow pay off that loan. Whether you choose to sell the property and use that to pay off the loan, whether you refinance and put a new loan in place, or use other money that you have from elsewhere, that's what the balloon means, is you're gonna have to pay off that debt that's existing sooner than when it would naturally be paid off if you just made monthly payments in full. Any questions about seller financing at all?
I'm good right now.
Cool. So then what is subject to financing? So basically buying a property subject to the existing loan means you are purchasing the property from the seller, but when you close, title is in your name. You are the owner of the property. However, the debt still stays in the seller's name. So the mortgage is still in the seller's name, and you're not making that official with the bank or the original lender on the debt. So the ideal, like you might be thinking, why would someone ever do this? And I'm gonna tell you, they need to be motivated that this is one of the only options for them or the best option for them. And some of the conditions in which this occurs is when a seller, seller has to be in some level of distress and willing to give up their existing loan just to move on. And that occurs typically when they have little to no equity on a property. They just transferred jobs, and maybe they can no longer make their existing mortgage payment, or they now have two mortgage payments because they bought a new property and couldn't sell the existing one. Maybe they bought it as an investment, but they're mismanaging it and they're negative cash flow. They're losing money each and every month. They're behind on their mortgage payments, so they're on their way to pre-foreclosure. Those are some of the distressed situations that cause the seller to be motivated to allow for a transaction like this to occur. And it's not that you're taking advantage of a distressed seller. Really, you're providing them one of the only solutions that can solve their problem. Because if they have little to no equity to sell that property, they're going to come out of pocket. They're going to lose money to sell because of all the closing costs, commissions, all that stuff. They're going to lose money. They're going to have to pay money to just sell their property. For them, this might be a better solution than either paying the money or ending up in foreclosure and ruining their credit. So the thing about purchasing a property subject to its existing debt is that the terms are already established by the existing debt. So let's say you purchase it for $240,000 and there's $188,000 of debt in place. That $188,000 of debt that's still there, that amount, you can't change that. That's how much you at minimum have to take over. So the lowest you could buy it for is that debt amount, and whatever the monthly payments are, the interest, amortization schedule, all of that, that's already existing. So you're just taking over sometime in the middle of someone else's debt, which is really great when I'm taking over properties at 2, 3, 4% interest rate. Although that's not available now, I'm purchasing those properties with that debt in place as part of it. Typically, when you are purchasing a property like this, you do pay the seller some money to acquire the property, depending on the level of distress or what's occurring. Let's say they're in pre-foreclosure, they might be several thousands of dollars or several months of payments behind. You're paying, $10,000, $20,000 just to catch them up. In that scenario, you might not be paying the seller anything. Or let's say you have to put in a lot of work to the property, you might not pay them anything, but ideally you're paying them something to help them move on to the next step of their life, whether it's maybe enough money for a security deposit, a month of mortgage, or a month of like rent or something along those lines. That's usually what you're paying to the seller, and that's going to be the difference between the purchase price and the loan amount that you're taking over. That's what you're paying them. So for you guys, FY, I'm going to be switching out a lot of these terms on the calculator that's here so that it's much more easy numbers, and I'm just going to make it look smoother. 240 and 230, like very obvious. Like, why would I give a seller $51,000 on a straight subject to deal? Like, I wouldn't. That'd be stupid.
I was wondering about that. That seemed like a lot of money.
It'd be hybrid in this scenario. So, so this one's just like not conducive to like a real life example that I would do. So I'm going to change that. I don't know. I just put random numbers, I think.
Okay.
And so, yeah, your loan balance and the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance are fixed. And if anything, your PITI, your mortgage, is probably going to go up once the insurance increases, as well as potentially the taxes. But at least your debt itself is fixed to the original loan terms. So then what is negotiable in this scenario? It's really the purchase price, which then dictates the amount of money to the seller. So if it's $240,000 purchase price and the loan is $230,000, that $10,000 is how much you pay them. What you can negotiate is say, hey, I'll buy it for $230,000, the same amount as your debt, which means there's no money going to them. Or you buy it for 232 or something like that. That's really what's negotiable in this scenario. And then if there's some closing costs, you can negotiate, if they're paying let's say they have an agent, or are they paying their buyer's agent? Are you going to cover the buyer's agent for them because they don't have a lot of equity, or they're not making any money on this transaction? Are you covering the full closing costs? Are you splitting it? Those are all things you can negotiate, very similar to a traditional transaction. And more common is hybrid, where you're combining subject to and seller finance. And this is a perfect example of it.
Can I
This makes
interject
perfect
with a
sense right here.
question,
Huh?
comment?
Yeah,
Can I
question,
interject?
please.
I think one thing that your audience might be thinking at this point is like why a seller might do this, or how the seller is secured in giving you that.
So I
Um,
highlight like they would have to be in distress in
yeah,
like to be motivated, but the protections for it, I don't know if I'm going to get into that in here just because the 1 hour, I agree with you. I would want to know,
okay.
well, how are they going to be protected that you don't pay them back? I can say a performance deed, or a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So if I
Mhm.
miss a payment by over 30 days, then we already have a signed quit claim where they will get title back under their name without having gone through the foreclosure process. Do I want to get into the nuances of how that like actually doesn't work? Really, it's like not that easy and all that. Not really.
Sure.
I agree with what you're saying. I just don't know. Like with the 1 hour, I'm like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, fair enough.
I actually had these 3 slides after my example slides because I think my example slides are really what's going to be the bread and butter of this presentation. But I
Okay.
do when I would jump straight to it, people were like, yeah, but what if we don't know any of these things? Like, I don't understand why someone would even sell it to you like that. And you'll see, like the examples are the best parts of this.
Okay.
But thank you for that. Anything else?
So far that's it.
Thank you. So then hybrid financing, which is a lot more common. In this instance, let's say you're buying hybrid, what is that? So it's when there's a subject to acquisition, but there is still equity in the deal. And instead of paying them out fully, you're paying them out a portion of that up front, and then you're just seller financing the difference. So instead of coming out of pocket $50,000, if that's their equity, you're paying them 20,000 and then financing the other 30,000, whether it's monthly payments or an annual payment or all paid out at a future date. That's all negotiable. And so the ideal conditions for something like this is the seller has equity, they have some equity as well as an existing mortgage or debt in place. And the one nuance here is now your monthly payments are whatever your subject to payments are, whatever the existing loan PITI, payments are, plus your seller finance payments. You have to account for both of those. So they're both going to eat away into your cash flow, but it could mean less money out of pocket. All right, cool. And I'll fix all these numbers to make them very nice and round shortly or after this. Any questions on this? You think that's fine given how in-depth I went in the last two?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And like the numbers would be like 300,000, $250,000 of equity, and then the $50,000 of down payment or something, pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go into like real life examples, right? It's cool to hear all this theoretically, but like, okay, what does this actually look like in practice? Is this even possible? Are people actually doing this? Let's go into that with one of my examples here. So this was well, I won't go into the purchase price yet because you're going to guess that soon. This is a beautiful castle. No, let's not say castle. That's what we call it, but a beautiful property in San Diego that we were able to buy using creative financing. So the timeline of how this went is I was scrolling through Zillow and I noticed this beautiful property was for sale. However, I recall seeing this property for sale just around a year ago. And I thought, wow, that's weird. It's back on the market. And for me, as a creative finance guy, that started raising some red flags. Looking at the sale history on this property, what red flags come to mind for you all?
Price drop.
Right. So for me, one of the things that I noticed is that they bought it just around a year, a year prior to relisting it for 2.2 million is what it was listed for. And then they ended up buying it a month later for 1.8 million. So $400,000 less than it was listed for within a month. Right. So they ended up buying it for 1.8 million. Obviously, the market said it wasn't worth more than that at that time in 2022. And then
Yeah.
when they relisted it in 2023, after interest rates went up, they listed it for 2.1 million. And the market previously said a year ago when interest rates were lower, it was only worth 1.8 million. So for me, that's a red flag. And what that means is if they were to sell it at $2.1 million, oh, okay. So that was the red flag, okay, that they relisted it. And then what I did is I went to PropStream to pull up mortgage information on the property. So I saw it was listed at $2.1 million, but they bought it for 1.8 million the year before. So I wanted to see, okay, well, how much debt do they have in place? Because they might want to sell it for $2.1 million, but it doesn't mean they actually will sell it for $2.1 million. So I went on PropStream, I looked up the mortgage info and realized their existing loan is right around $1.8 million, meaning they put little to no money down when they acquired the property, and they might have even rolled in some of the closing costs into that. So if they were to sell it at the same price as they bought it at, they would have to pay a bunch of money out of pocket. Even at $2.1 million, once you account for all the closing costs, the commissions, all that, they're still going to walk away with very little money. So if they had to drop it any further, I knew, okay, this is a good candidate for creative finance. So what I did is I called the agent and I said, hey, agent, really basically the day after it was listed, I said, hey, agent, I see this beautiful properties on the market. And I said, I'm looking at the Zillow listing right now. I'd love to come take a look at it. In my mind, I already know a lot of things about the mortgage and the situation, but I'm not going to convey that in the call with the agent. And so I talk to them and say, hey, I see this beautiful property on the market. I want to come by and take a look. My wife and I are looking for our next property. I'm looking on Zillow right now. Oh, actually, I see this property was listed just around a year or sold just around a year ago. Is there anything going on with the property? Is there anything wrong with the property? Is that why they're selling it? In my mind, I know that's rarely ever the case, but that gives the agent an easy out to start communicating kind of what is really the motivation? What's the reason why they have to sell it so quickly in such a short amount of time? He mentioned that, no, there's nothing wrong with the property. The seller moved. He's currently got it vacant. He was using it as a short-term rental. It doesn't work for him anymore. Since he moved, he was using it as a short-term rental. He's not making the returns that he thought, and he's just trying to sell it off now. It's a beautiful property. And he wants to give it to someone else, who can do something with it. So I said, okay, well, that's awesome. I don't think I'm your buyer. I just quickly ran the numbers. I don't think I'm your buyer at this $2.1 million amount, because once I run, at that time it was like 7-8% interest rate. Once I run all those numbers, I don't see any way, for me to make financial sense on this property, because I'm an investor. I'm looking to buy properties that I can make more money each month than it costs me for that property. And I don't see a good way to do that. There's one thing, and it may not work for you right now. It may not work for your seller at all right now, or even at all, but depending on how low your sale price goes, I might be able to offer you a higher sale price or a higher purchase price on your property if your seller is willing and open to allow me to purchase the property while leaving the debt in place. So I would buy the property from him. The debt would stay in their place, but I would be the one responsible for making all the payments. If I missed any payments within 30 days, title would transfer back to the seller and they would be the owner of the property again. Is that something that you think they might be interested in? Agent said, no, we just put it on the market. We're getting a bunch of views. We're not worried about that. We're going to sell it. We'll probably sell it for over $2.1 million. All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much. After that, I followed up with him over 5 times. I followed up with him in the middle of May, 2 weeks later, followed up with him right before the end of May. Can any of you guess why it's really great to follow up with an agent right before the end of the month?
So that's when their commissions get paid out.
Actually, it's when the seller's gonna have to pay their mortgage, and the seller's gonna be very frustrated every month they're paying a large mortgage amount on a vacant property that's sitting there. Because he was losing money as a short-term rental before, but now it's sitting there vacant. He's losing all the money now, just sitting there vacant. So
I
I
see.
called at the end of the month, and I called I called like June 1st or 2nd again. And I said, hey, just wanted to touch base with you again, see if this is a viable option, if there's something your seller's interested in. The next day, he dropped it to 1.99 million. So I thought to myself immediately, from 1.9 million to 1.8, he's probably going to make $0 when he sells this property. If anything, if he doesn't sell it, he might even have to actually pay money to sell this property. I didn't know how much, but I knew he'd probably have to, once you account for buyer's commission or, the seller's agent, maybe if they have to cover the buyer's agent, San Diego is a little different market. Sellers do have a lot more control here. Closing costs, things like that. They might end up with no money or even have to pay money to sell the property. But I kept following up, and I followed up once again in the middle of June and the end of June and then the very beginning of July. And he said, and I asked, all I'm looking to do is talk to your seller and see if there's maybe an option here that that I can provide them, get you paid, get your seller an opportunity to move on from this property and not keep losing money each month while it sits here vacant. Is that something you think your seller would be interested in doing? So then he got me on a call with the seller, and my whole goal, and you'll notice this creative financing, is to understand fully the seller's motivation. What is it that they're looking to accomplish? A lot of the times it's not just the numbers of the deal, it's really what are they looking to accomplish and how can creative financing solve that problem for them. In this instance, the seller, as I mentioned, bought the property, they moved away, they tried to rent it out as a short-term rental. What they ended up doing was putting a mom and pop style property manager in place who was not capable of managing this big, beautiful property. They weren't able to coordinate the cleaners well, to furnish the property right, to stage the photos right. They weren't able to do any of that. So they were actually losing money each month. And the seller was getting frustrated because he didn't have the money to just keep pouring into this property. That's not why he did it. So talking to him, he just wanted to move on. He did not want, he used this VA loan to acquire the property with no money down and rolled in his closing costs. He really had no money into it besides the furnishing costs. And what he was looking to do is move on without going into foreclosure, because if he can't sell it, he didn't want to pay money to close. He didn't want to pay money to sell the property, but he also didn't want to not be able to sell it and then not make his payments and then go into foreclosure. Not going to foreclosure. So I don't know why I'm so fucking lost. It's these damn text messages. Not going to foreclosure, because once you go into foreclosure with a VA loan, not only do you ruin your credit from the foreclosure perspective, but you're also losing your ability to ever use your VA loan again. So that was like a double whammy for him. He would rather use his VA loan sometime in the future than lose it forever. So I said, okay, well, I have a solution. I have a solution for you. I mean, the debt is still going to stay under your name. I have ways to make it so that it does not impact your debt to income ratio. So you can buy your next property. He said, I already have my next property. I'm already living in it. I don't even care about that right now. I care about being able to buy something in the future. I just don't want to keep losing money each and every month. And I really don't want to sit here every night stressing about what's going on in this property, how much I have to pay this month, all those kinds of concerns. Actually, I'm going to get rid of the M&M method. I'm not going to confuse these people. Yeah, babe? Yeah, can you text my cousin and tell her? I'm doing my Zoom right now. Sorry, y'all. Seller motivation. Um, okay, let's say solve seller's problem. Okay, we'll do that because M&M method is a lease option where you're doing it, you're executing the lease piece to be able to take ownership of the property to rent it out, make as much money as you can during the option or during the lease period, and then execute your option. And instead of having to come to the table with $100,000, we'll say, like my example, we only had to come up to the table with $60,000 because of the amount of money that we were able to generate during the summer months that we were managing the property. Don't worry too much about that, guys. That's what that was. And it's a cool one, but it's got its own issues, but it's a cool way to reduce your entry costs to acquire really great properties if you can rent it out quickly and make some money.
Hmm.
Okay. And so once I was able to get that structured with the really shortly after that conversation with the seller, within days, we were able to get all the terms penciled out and then get closing. I decided to postpone closing a few months because the seller allowed me permission. Instead of coming to the table to close right away, we were going to be able to do is renovate the property, improve the furnishings, and start renting it out. So we ended up making tens of thousands of dollars between the time that we put it under contract and the time that we closed on it. I guess I kind of talked about the M&M method, but
Yeah.
and then we closed on it. What price do you think we were able to buy the property at?
Based on what you just said, I feel like you had to come pretty close to 1 point, basically that price change there, 1.99 to get him some money after the fact.
Right.
There's some benefit to him, so maybe 2.0 around there. I see you pulled it, but
Yeah, so actually we bought the property for exactly the amount of the loan. There was no money to the seller in this instance. He was on his way to foreclosure. He was like, he called it pre-foreclosure. He would have not been able to make the next monthly payment. And we were able to solve that problem by not getting him into foreclosure, by allowing him to, by covering this, he was not going to lose his VA loan indefinitely. And he was able to sell it without having to come out of pocket to pay any of the closing costs. But to be fair, we covered all the agent commissions, all the closing costs. So although the seller walked away and didn't make any money on it, what he doesn't have to do is worry about losing money each and every month, right? And he didn't have to worry about paying money to sell the property. So we were able to buy it for the exact loan amount, nothing more, nothing less. The exact loan amount, no money to the seller in this instance, but we did cover all of the closing costs. Didn't hassle for anything on an inspection report. Just made it a very seamless, smooth closing. We were able to take over a 4.5% interest rate on almost, $1.7 million, almost $1.8 million.
that's awesome, dude.
Yeah, this one was sick. Actually, for you guys, the $18,000 of seller finance or $18,000 of agent commission, which was way less than 1%. I negotiated that down to less than 1%. Because I did all the work at the end of the day, plus my TC did all the work. He actually, the seller still had to cover his 50%, but we financed it back to him. So he only pays us small amounts each month over a time period. So it's actually
So
even better.
he still paid the closing costs. It's just you helped him pay it
Just
over
over
time.
time. Right.
Yeah,
Right. So
incredible.
he paid the agent commission. I covered all the rest of the closing costs, but the agent commission.
Sure. That's
All right.
crazy.
Yeah. So this is what we call in the creative finance community as a straight sub two deal. You're buying it for exactly the loan amount or whatever I was going to pay him was going to be the loan amount plus the cash to him was the purchase price. In this instance, it was just purchase the property for exactly the debt. Here's another example. This is a property that we were able to, any questions about this transaction at all?
How do I get one?
Yeah, you got to find yourself a motivated seller. And as I mentioned in this instance, the motivation that first, the red flag for me was that they just bought it a year prior. The market shifted and they listed it on the market. And I assumed that they would not be able to sell it at that price because it wasn't able to be sold at that price a year ago.
Before.
And interest rates only increased since then. And then when I looked up their debt income, I realized, wow, they're 100% over 100% financed. So I know they listed it for $2.1 million, right? But just because someone lists it for something does not mean that's what it will sell for. As we saw in this example, almost $400,000 less plus creative, or $300,000 less plus including creative finance. Cool.
It's crazy.
So now let's talk about another property that we were able to buy on the opposite end of the spectrum. So let's look at the timeline for this duplex in Atlanta, right near the airport. So this wasn't us who found this deal initially. a wholesaler was on PropStream looking up a tired landlord. What do you think makes up a tired landlord? Like what are the characteristics or traits of what you would consider a tired landlord?
Deferred maintenance, struggling to rent it out consistently, problem tenants,
Right. So,
estate residents.
right. Those are definitely some of the characteristics. This one was an out of area landlord. So he owned it and did not live in the area. He owned it outright. And actually, he bought it as a cash property and then invested the money to renovate it and make it really nice and furnish it. Um, and a new wholesaler was able to find this. He just pulled up a list of, low or high equity tired landlords on PropStream, skip traced the list and started calling all the sellers saying, hey, are you interested in selling your property? Interested in selling your property? Would you be open to financing it? For example, if we gave you the price you're looking for, would you be open to taking payments over time? He got that far, which is amazing, but he didn't know what to do next. So when he had that, he brought it to me and we joint ventured on the property. He said, hey, I've got it, someone who's interested in selling. They're open to seller finance, but I don't know how to do any of the rest. So what I did was I talked to the seller and the whole goal was to understand motivation. As I mentioned, he was out of state, he's older gentleman, did not want to worry about the property itself, but he really did enjoy the monthly income that was coming from it. He didn't want to really deal with tenants or think about them while he's trying to live his retired life and go travel the world. So when I got that information from him, we talked about what are some of the most important. He's open to seller finance in this instance, but it's what are the most important terms? What is he looking for above all else? For him, there was two main things. He wanted a $450,000 purchase price. He was very adamant that's what he wanted for it. In my mind, it was worth closer to 410, 420, but he wanted $450,000. And he wanted around $45,000 down or 10% of the purchase price so that whoever bought it from him had some skin in the game. I said, okay, well, I'll take your terms. What are all the terms that you have in mind? And then I'm going to underwrite it. I'm going to see if this is a great deal or not for me. If it is, awesome, I'll buy it. If it's not, I will propose to you maybe some terms that work for me, and we can see if we can come to an agreement. So the original deal terms that he had, $450,000 purchase price with a down payment of $45,000 or 10%. That left the remainder of his seller finance loan at $405,000. He said he wanted 5.5% interest rate. I didn't even spend time negotiating there. I said, cool, I'll check it out at 5.5% interest rate, amortized over 30 years with a balloon in 7 years. I said, all right, thank you for those terms. When I calculated it, the monthly payment for that was $2,300 for the principal and interest on that $405,000 loan at 5.5% interest. When I analyzed the deal based on this property being operated as a long-term furnished rental, which I thought was a misuse of the property, but I wasn't going to tell him that. That would cost me more money. I was able to cash flow $426 a month and get a cash on cash return of 6%. I said, not bad. I actually like that. And I haven't even negotiated with the guy yet. And I'm getting a 6% cash on cash return. I'm taking over a property for 10% interest rate or 10% down and a 5.5% interest rate when interest rates are in the 8s and 9s at this point, right? I said, all right, that's not bad. Let's lock this deal up. Let's put it under contract. And I'm certain I can make this much better. Even without increasing the rental income, I can make this much better by the time we get to closing. So my strategy typically is in this type of scenario, when someone has equity, there is the ability to negotiate on that in some capacity. Whether it's the purchase price, the down payment, the monthly payments, whatever it is, there's that ability. So we went and had a very, very thorough inspection. I went through and highlighted I highlighted multiple things. It was like, on an inspection where it was like 50 plus things. I highlight all the things I would like fixed. Then I highlight things in red that need to get fixed, things that absolutely need to get resolved. Otherwise, there's no way I can move forward with this transaction. So what I did was I said, okay, what is going to make the most sense for this deal? I calculated roughly $20,000 of immediate work that I wanted to get done. I would have preferred to have done it myself. But I said, hey, seller, are you open to negotiate on these things based on the inspection report? I'm not here to nickel and dime you on all these 50 items. There's even these 25 things I'd like to get done, but there's these 5 things that I absolutely need to get done for this to work for us. I've given you all your terms, but this is kind of what I'm looking for now. So we were able to negotiate was once I learned, it's all of his furnishings. I said, awesome. I will actually increase the purchase price by $5,000, but I want all your furniture in there because it would cost me $20,000 myself to do it. So if I can just buy that from him for 5,000 and it's financed, way better deal for me, way less money I have to bring to the table. Said,
Mhm.
you want $45,000. I'll give you your $45,000, right? So what are the two things? I gave him more than he was originally looking for. Yes, I asked for furniture, but he didn't want to deal with the furniture anyway. What's he going to do with 2 units of furniture? I gave him the down payment and I said, okay, cool. I've given you these two. Now we need to work on my terms for the rest. So the seller finance loan was up $5,000 more, right? I wasn't going to pay him that for the furniture outright. I was going to finance it. And I said, okay, instead of asking for a $20,000 price reduction, would you be open? Because for me, I care about my cash flow and my cash on cash return. What's my monthly profit and how can I reduce my entry cost into the deal so I can increase my cash on cash return? So for me, how can I reduce my payments more than anything else? Well, if the loan was the same, all I can really do is adjust the interest rate or just say, or make lower payments. So I said, you know what? Instead of affecting the purchase price, what if would you be open to financing it at a lower interest rate? And he said, I would consider that because, you're giving me these things. I understand there's gotta be some give or take. And instead of reducing the purchase price by 20,000, let's see if we can work something else out that works better. So he said, what interest rate are you looking for? And I told him, I wanted him to tell me his interest rate. He already said 5.5% was what he was looking for. And I knew, okay, cool. If that's what he's looking for. I have to anchor very low because I'm looking for somewhere in the 4 to 4.5%, because that would mean several hundred more dollars a month in my pocket every single month.
Hmm.
So what I said was, well, I was thinking more 2 to 2.5% interest rate. And he was a little shocked at first, right? As you can imagine. But he said,
Yeah.
you know what? I understand where you're coming from. I know you got to make up that $20,000 somehow. What if we did something closer to 4 to 4.5% interest rate? And I said, I really wanted that 2 to 2.5%. Obviously, you all know I wanted closer to the 4 to 4.5. I would have been totally fine with 4.5%. But that's why it's really important to anchor low and negotiate from there. If you put all your cards on the table, then you're going to end up exactly with that or worse. So it's very important to negotiate that piece. And by the time it was all said and done, the interest we agreed to was 3.5%. And the amortization stayed at 30 years, but I was able to extend the balloon to 10 years. I said, well, now that I'm buying this property, I'm giving you the price that you want. I want to ensure I keep this great debt in place for a little bit longer. So that took my payment from $2,300 a month to $1,841 a month, meaning I increased my cash flow from $426 to $885 a month. And my cash on cash return now was 14% as a long-term rental, as a long-term furnished rental. Obviously, I'm going to be in not obviously, what I was able to do is rent this property out as a midterm rental, drastically increasing the income. But I'm not going to say all that when we're talking to the seller. I'm very transparent about how I analyze my numbers, but I'm not going to give them a much higher purchase price because I can rent it out in a strategy that makes me more money than they are currently doing.
Sure.
So over that time period, over that 10 years, I'm saving over $60,000 in interest, which is phenomenal. A $20,000 price reduction, which would not have actually done as much because my PITI would have still been very high. I was able to save $60,000 of interest over this 10-year time span. And let me ask you this. Are you familiar with what cash on cash return is? One of the main metrics for analyzing real estate investment deals? Yeah,
It's the return you're getting on your initial investment, right?
right. So it's what is the annual cash flow that you're receiving divided by your entry costs. So the two things that I was focused on in the negotiations, I wasn't worried about purchase price or the down payment necessarily. I was more focused on how can I increase my cash flow and how can I reduce my entry costs. The most straightforward way to do so for me was actually increase the purchase price and buy the furniture, but finance that instead of $20,000 I had to pay out of pocket. Now it's $5,000 over 10 years and at 3.5% interest, right? And I was able to reduce the interest rate to drastically increase my monthly cash flow. Those two themselves is why I was able to increase the cash on cash return. And in reality, we're looking at over 25% now by just incorporating midterm rental instead of long-term furnished rentals. We just easily made the shift to midterm plus short-term rental as needed. So we got to the closing table, able to buy this great property, right, in 2023, 10% down, acquire all the furniture at 3.5% interest rate. right? Drastically different than what you're used to at 25% down payment, 8-9% interest rate, whatever it is now. And the best part about this, and this is something I always do, if I'm giving someone money, if I'm giving the seller cash, I'm going to follow up with them. And I'm going to say, hey, 6 months later, hey, I have this other property similar to the way we bought yours, and I'm looking for X amount of dollars to be able to purchase this new investment. Is that something you'd be interested in to come in as a private money lender or a partner with me on this deal? And he actually lent me $60,000 to acquire the next another investment. And his big thing was, I know how thorough and diligent you were when you were acquiring the property for me. Now I want to be on your team. I don't want to be against you. I want to be on your team to acquire this property together. And he's my private money lender now and giving me more money than I actually gave him in the down payment. Any questions on this straight seller finance deal?
I guess for me, I'm curious about whether the amortization, is that something people tend to be open to negotiating? If you wanted to do it over 40 years, wouldn't that also reduce your payment?
Yes. And that's what I typically do at 0%. I'll mess with the amortization to keep it at 0%. But when you're talking to, for this example, this property, it's a duplex. So he's a more sophisticated investor. You can't
Okay,
really get away with not paying them any interest. You could have
sure.
increased the amortization, but now you're just paying a lot more interest over that time period. And this is
Okay,
what people are used to, 30 years or 15 years. So we try to keep it really simple and negotiate on things that people understand more rather than trying to convince them of things that they're not necessarily, somewhat familiar with, if that
gotcha.
makes sense.
For sure.
But I love to adjust the amortization. That's when I'm doing 0% interest, it's all based on what amortization will I need at 0% interest to get them paid off get them the monthly payment they want. That's how I'm able to negotiate based on monthly payment, not on interest rate. So that's a great question.
Awesome.
All right, so let's move on. So analyzing creative deals, the cool part for you all, who are familiar with underwriting real estate investments in general, is it's the exact same thing. Your cash flow is your income minus your fixed expenses, minus your variable expenses or your reserves. And your cash on cash return is your annual cash flow divided by your entry costs. Should I put that maybe before these two examples? You think that'd be helpful or no?
The definition, yeah, it could be.
I think it would be too. And then I'll get into, because then I talked about cash flow and cash return a few times. So
Yeah,
just once again, the only difference now is when you're making your monthly debt payment, you just have to understand, is it seller finance? Is it subject to? Is it a combination of the both? And that's really the only real difference in that example to calculate your cash flow and your cash return. Plus, there's a few more entry costs to consider. Oh, so now I got to get to entry costs. All right, that's fine. Let's do all that together up front. Yeah, let's do all that as part of structuring. And then your entry costs are going to be your cash to seller. So what down payment are you going to pay the seller? Any arrears. So if they're behind on any mortgage payments, if they have any liens and you have to pay those off at closing. Any agent commissions, if you're the one responsible for a portion of it, you have to account for that as part of your acquisition costs. If there's any renovation, rehab, whatever you need to do to get the property rent ready based on your exit strategy. So if it's a short-term rental, you're going to paint some walls, you're going to add furnishings. That's all part of your rehab or renovation costs. Any closing costs that you're accountable for. I always add this one, your admin or marketing costs, or exit costs. So for me, at minimum, I'm setting up my LLC. I'm doing an inspection. I'm going to take photos, typically professional photos. I'm going to account for that in here as well. If you're buying the property from a wholesaler, you're going to need to account for that assignment fee there. And then any carrying costs, which I account for reserves. I account for 3 months of fixed expense reserves over this. I account for 3 months of fixed expense reserves as part of my entry costs as well. Even though I know I don't plan on spending it, I'm going to leave that money in the account. So that's part of this is the cost it takes to acquire this deal. And then we'll go into these examples. See, a slide deck looks daunting when you look at it like this, but then it's animated, so it's a little better. So here, let's talk about some negotiation tips for you when you're trying to work on a creative deal. And these are all properties I was able to buy last year, all through creative financing. So the number one thing is to build confidence, trust, and rapport with your seller. Don't be transactional. Really spend the time to understand what is going on with their property What is going on in their specific situation? Why are they willing and open to consider creative financing? And why is that a solution for them? So you can structure the best deal for them. Understand what creative transaction or what creative acquisition strategies are actually feasible. For example, what acquisition strategies are actually feasible. For example, if they own the property outright, it's going to be seller finance. If they have debt in place, it's going to be either subject to or hybrid. You have to understand what is feasible before you even try to present creative terms to them. And then when you are talking about terms, understand what is adjustable versus not. If it's a subject to deal, you're not going to change the monthly principal, interest, tax, insurance payments, or the loan amount. There's no point in negotiating that. You can negotiate the cash of the seller. If it's seller finance, everything is basically negotiable, but understand what matters to them, right? You can't negotiate everything. Negotiate what will get you the highest cash on cash return. Understand what really matters to your seller, and then understand for you as the buyer, what do you need to adjust to get the most bang for your buck? For example, the duplex scenario, for me, could I have reduced the purchase price? Sure. It made way more financial sense instead to either reduce my entry costs, which would have been reducing, in my example, it was reducing the furniture cost. That was easier than the down payment because he really wanted that money for whatever reason. He said he wanted to travel with it. Fine, it's a lot of money to travel with, but he wanted that, and it's not my place to question him. And for me, it was he didn't really mention a lot on the monthly payment or the interest. So I knew that was where I was going to increase my cash flow significantly and drastically increase my cash on cash return. Your goal should always be to increase your cash on cash return because that is literally telling you how hard is your money working for you. Don't sabotage yourself if possible. Focus on payments, not interest and amortization. If they don't say anything about a balloon, don't present it. If they do, okay, understand that you need a realistic balloon timeframe. Don't have a balloon on a great loan that you're acquiring or a great debt at 1, 2, 3 years. Give yourself a reasonable amount of time. I say the minimum for me is 7 years. And the thing I didn't mention is every single balloon I put in all of my contracts, they're under 2 conditions. One, I have to have one of these 2 met before the balloon occurs. Otherwise, it extends 1 year at a time. I have to either have 30% loan to value. No, I have to have 30% equity in the property at that time. Or I need the interest rate that's available in the current marketplace to be less than the existing interest rate. If one of those is viable, then I'm required to refinance. If not, then it extends by another year. So don't sabotage yourself. Don't mention balloons, but also understand you can work around them if it'll kill your deal. But don't be unrealistic and set a 1, 2, 3, 4 year balloon, banking on the property just appreciating massively in value. Always use your inspection report as a negotiation tool. I don't care if you're buying it as is, this, that, whatever. Always leverage your inspection report if it's a third-party vendor saying there's these issues with the property. And always be ethical and negotiate in good faith. If you can pay your seller, you should. I know we shared the example with you where we didn't pay the seller anything, but what we did do is cover all of the closing costs so that they didn't have to pay any money to sell. What we did do was ensure they had a reasonable balloon at 12 years so that in 12 years, they don't have to worry about a foreclosure. They don't lose their VA loan. They get everything back at 12 years. They get the debt gets removed from under their name, and then they get their VA loan back at that 12-year mark. So how can you take action today? I would say the first thing you could do, the easiest way is to get PropStream. Decide if you want to target low or high equity. So whether you're looking for subject to or seller finance transactions. And if you want to look on market, like something listed on the MLS, on Zillow, or if you're looking for off market and want to talk to sellers directly as opposed to agents on market. Pull a list, create your own filters or use their preset ones. I have a low equity one, which is basically someone who bought the property a year prior and is relisting it. Whether, based on, there's another one, they anticipated equity in the property is less than 15% and it's being sold. Or there's another one where it's high days on market, it's been sitting for a long time, or they have a lot of equity. There are some filters. If on market, start connecting with agents. That's the most cost-effective way to do so. On market, connect with agents. Doesn't cost you any money for skip tracing or anything like that. If it's off market, you're gonna have to skip trace the list and find the seller's information and start calling them, sending them mailers. Use your new skills that we discussed to lock up incredible deals, as we discussed. If you need help with underwriting, feel free to reach out to me. This is literally what I do for people. This is how I help people out with underwriting their creative finance transactions. And usually what we end up doing is we joint venture on the property. You bring me a motivated seller. If I'm able to structure the terms, we're able to joint venture on it and work together on selling it to someone else who might want to buy it. Or if you want to buy it, you just, pay a commission for that. I have one thing that's really important is once you lock up one of these properties, maybe you don't know how to put it under contract. Maybe you don't know what's the process to get it through title, escrow, closing. That's where I actually have a creative TC transaction coordination company to help you close these deals to make sure it's all done right. So you don't hit the due on sale clause and you minimize your risk of that. So if you need any of that, come to me, just find motivated sellers. I'll help you with underwriting and structuring it. I'll refer you to the transaction coordination company that will help you get the process or the property all the way to closing. And here's different lists and motivations for you to focus on. We got high equity, low equity, high days on market, blah, blah, whatever. So with all that being said, does anyone have any questions about creative financing or underwriting? Please stay connected with me on Instagram. And I actually have a free real estate investing calculator, multiple, for you to download, conventional and creative financing. So go to my Instagram. While you're there, you might as well click follow, no big deal. Go to the link in the bio and download my free calculator from there. And then if you want to learn how you can better underwrite investments, creative, cash, conventional, check out my YouTube as well as just to hear more about the deals that I'm currently doing. And then after blah, 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 after a few minutes. And for those of you who prefer, here's QR codes for everything. I want them to go this route so they at least see the Instagram and they might follow. If not, whatever. But then they have the QR code directly to the things.
Nice.
That's a lot for an hour. That's crazy.
Nice, dude.
It was awesome. Yeah.
I feel like it could add a lot of value to people, but I feel like it's just a hard thing to oh, my hand's been up this long. I feel like it's a whole lot of things to spew at someone, but I wanted the 2 examples above everything else because people talk about subject to seller finance, but it's like, well, I don't know what that actually looks like. Like, I don't know what that means, what that looks like. When does that work? Well, here's 2 examples on the extreme ends that I work for straight seller finance, straight subject to. That's how it worked. And that's my goal for this probably more than anything else. All right, so
I would maybe, so first of all, awesome job. Like it was very thorough. And as someone that's newer to the community, it's helpful to see that kind of laid out. So this was awesome for me. So thank you for that. But just some thoughts on when you're presenting on stage. You may consider like talking slower.
Right. And
I almost
trying to talk
consider,
slow right now, which is the hard part.
I know, but it'll come off more confident, I think. Some
Right.
people actually talk faster when they're not confident, and you know what you're talking about. It's clear that you do. But just something to think about is that, like, especially at the beginning, you don't necessarily, it seemed like you were kind of
I was just rushing through the
with like
finance up to that stuff, or
even your own introduction of like
Mm.
your background and stuff. You were kind of rushing through it just to get through a bunch of stuff, and it maybe isn't all that necessary to get into every detail of that, just because
eliminate some of that. I think there's a lot of redundancy on that slide. Maybe eliminate some of it, just be more confident in what I'm talking about.
I think, yeah, just slow it down a little bit. Like you're on stage for a reason, right? You know your
Right.
shit. So you don't have to give so much detail about your background necessarily. Give some for sure. Just maybe consider slowing it down a little bit, and maybe that will give you more time to get to the meat of the deals you want to show. And kind of similar thing with the other slides too. You're delivering a lot of value, and I think it's awesome, but it may go over some people's heads a little bit.
Right.
You're not able to slow it down just a teeny bit.
Okay.
I think it also come across, not that you're not confident, right? You obviously know your stuff. It seemed a little fast. And I know part of that's because you got to fit it into an hour.
Right.
Talk.
That's literally what it is
Yeah.
that's a big part of it is like, oh, fuck, I want to get all this stuff across because it's like this all got to make sense together, but it's so much info. How do I communicate it within this time span? I think I could have done any one of the 3. Find, negotiate, analyze, like, or whatever the fucking 3 is. I don't know what it was, but find, structure, and negotiate. Those each themselves are at least an hour, right?
Absolutely.
Putting them all in one sequence of an hour, I'm like, that's crazy. But they set that topic for me, unfortunately.
For sure. No, it was a high value presentation for sure. That was just my only notes, and they're totally optional.
That's awesome.
Like,
No.
As
I've
great
already
as it
taken into
was,
account and put notes in there or comments that I'm going to go back right now and fix. What about the flow that you think now that we talking about creative finance methods first? We're not going to really touch base on them. We're just going to show them. And then I'm going to say we're getting to the top 3 right now. Seller finance. Should I just get rid of seller slash owner financing and just select one? I don't know what's more common for people. I've heard both depending on who you're talking to, but I want
Yeah.
people to understand like both are the same thing, but
I
Mhm.
think you could leave that in there because I think agents refer to it one way and then investors refer to it another way. So,
yeah, that's could be where the confusion
yeah.
comes from.
Are you going to be taking questions like you did here, like during?
Yeah, so I'm gonna do a lot of back and forth as much as possible.
Nice.
I know it's gonna take more time,
Yeah. Because
but
you might get some like long-winded people. That's the only thing, and then you'll have to like rush through
right.
a
So I
bunch of
think most of my
shit.
Q&A is gonna happen throughout, not at the end.
Okay.
Is what it's gonna like. There's gonna be if there's time, we can Q&A at the end.
Nice.
Most of it's gonna happen in real time during, I think.
Yeah.
More like workshop back and forth style because it's small enough group. I think 150. I think we'll say like 1 or 2 questions per like slide max.
That's good. Yeah, I would kind of have a cap maybe.
Right. Because yeah, and the thing is, what I need to remind myself is I don't need to be overly nuanced because I am. Like if you hear me on a podcast, I'm over clarifying everything like all the time. And it's like, well, Michael, just give the high level answer. You don't need to get into the weeds right now. Just give the high level answer because there's already more than enough information for them in this context.
Totally. And I think
Comes
it'll
from a
be a
place of
funnel.
wanting to deliver value. So I, for one, I
Yeah.
appreciate it. But at the same time, if you're trying to get this across to people that aren't convinced yet and don't know, like it could be too much, especially like as Alex said, if you get somebody with a lot of questions in the middle, it could throw off the whole thing.
Right. So are you saying don't do the questions or
I'm
maybe
saying if
what?
you can maybe push the questions to the end. And then another thought I just had was maybe to get the buy-in that you were trying to like talk to at the
Right.
beginning, maybe just show the pictures of the properties you were able to sell at the beginning and then get into your definitions of how this works and then explain the specific deals, you know?
So show a bunch of different properties like that we
Show
bought. They're using creative finance.
show the example properties that you're going to go through, show at the beginning of just like here's the property I was able to acquire through subject to, and here's the one I was able to get the duplex on with seller financing. Um, just to kind
But
of
don't do the
demonstrate
whole
that it works.
timeline thing. You're just saying just show it a glimpse of it and then get into
Yeah,
the.
kind of give a preview of like this is how it
Oh, okay.
works, and that goes into this is who I am, this is what I do, like, and you're kind of giving that credibility through showing. It's like how people say, you know, the HUD up thing, like you're putting it
Right.
right out in front of this is what I do, this is why you should care, without having to say it all.
Do you
You know
think
what I mean?
self-made real estate investors a little like unnecessary? I mean, like literally, like first generation American mom worked 3 jobs, no fucking money at all. I had to do it all, figure it all
Yeah.
out on my own with
Yeah, I think
little to
that's
no
cool.
help.
No, I
But
think
I feel like who am
So,
I to
you
like,
are. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
hey man, a lot of people want to be in your shoes right now, so I would own it, you know.
Okay.
You said you're financially independent at 27, you said?
Yeah.
It's a good place to be, man.
Should
So I would
I?
own it.
So keep that.
Yeah.
I would keep
I would
it.
keep that.
Okay.
From my perspective, like everything you said was valid. It's just trying to make the time frame work, you know?
Right.
It's
And
not that
maybe the
anything you were
chemical
saying
engineer,
was,
US Army, does that even matter?
I mean, I
Yeah, I
appreciate
think that's
the
cool.
service, so I
Oh,
think you
okay.
keep it in.
Yeah.
Maybe the creative transaction engineering sub 2 leader underwriting specialist, is that valuable, you think, to people?
I say leave the accolades.
Okay.
You can leave
For
it
me,
on
it's
there if you
nice.
don't necessarily speak to all of it, you know?
Yeah, for me, the underwriting piece, I just want people to understand it's like
That's what they
understanding
can
what
come
is
to
a
you for.
deal at face value, but then what can also be renegotiated to see can
Yeah,
that be a deal? Like, can you make this a deal? That's the real distinction. It's not underwriting as is, but then can't this have the possibility of
how do
being
you
a great investment for
rework
you?
it? For sure.
Okay, cool. That's very helpful. Thank you guys.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be
Yeah,
cool.
because it probably wasn't that helpful, but I
No, it
told you
is
Uh,
helpful.
be
Just
more
doing it
concise
itself is
without.
helpful, and
Yeah.
hearing
yeah,
questions so then I can fill them in, at least mentally, is helpful. I'm a lot better live than I am on Zoom, for sure. I'm a way better live speaker. Like my live podcasts or my live speaking engagements are way better than over Zoom because then I think when I don't have the audience, I'm like I overthink everything. Especially when it's
Yeah.
happening, I just go in real time. But then I talk fast, so we'll see how that goes.
No, I think
great.
it's going to be great. It
Yeah,
was definitely high value
Thank you.
for people
Y'all
paying
have a
attention.
great weekend. I appreciate you all. Well, you both.
you got
Thank you
it.
for being here. I guess that's it.
Congratulations, brother.
Thank you. Yeah, little
Sure.
baby Emma's here. Little baby Mila.
Yeah.
Nice, dude.
I will want to connect with you at another point in time when you got some time, Mike.
Yeah,
I
for
want
sure.
to understand your business on the coast to coast vets thing and how this works with Adam, because I'm actually working with some folks on a project for veterans housing.
Oh, cool.
And I know Alex Wilson's been reaching out to you because we're trying to figure out how our partnership's going to work. So he was asking
Okay.
kind of
He
how
reached out to me or Adam?
he said he reached out to you.
He might have. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
gonna lie to you. I
you're
have
a
so
busy
many
guy,
messages in
and I know
DMs
you
that
got a new
who
kid.
always
Yeah,
ask me things. I'm like, I don't know when the fuck I
yeah,
can get back to that, but I would love to help
for
you out.
sure.
Yeah, but
But
I'll
yeah,
talk
if
to
you
you
get a
after.
chance, man, I'd love to talk.
Yeah, no worries. That's too easy. All right, guys.
Awesome.
Well,
Well, go
all right.
say hi
Have
to
a
the
good
new
weekend.
kid and have a good weekend. Yeah, nice to meet you too, Alex.
All right, see you guys.
Appreciate you
Peace.
guys. Bye.
Yep. Bye bye.